All right, so today we're going to do some more complex organic cutouts so that you can get these silhouettes with a curvilinear edge, and perhaps, if you would like, some interior cuts as well. And this is obviously a lot more complicated than a straight cut. So I wanted to show you using an example of one of Ernest Haeckel's drawings where I actually scribbled on the back. I held this up to the window and scribbled on the back, so then I can line it up with the edge of your paper. Remember, you don't want to cut from the interior of your paper so that you don't create an unnecessary amount of scrap. You will need to probably use several sheets of paper, and you don't want to burn through it unnecessarily quickly because you are just not being smart about where you're cutting. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to trace this edge. I've actually already done this, so I'm not going to make you watch me do the whole thing, but just sort of trace around this edge, and what that does is transfer that drawing onto this piece of paper. And then I also traced a few, I'm going to add one more, interior cuts. So it's a little, some people prefer to do interior cuts after they cut their piece. Some people prefer to do them before. Personally, it kind of depends on the cuts for me, but for your case, I would do the interior cuts first. And notice that I, A, just changed my blade to make sure it was nice and sharp, and B, that I'm moving my paper as I cut. You want to keep your pressure very close to where you're cutting so that you aren't, so that you have the most control over where you want the cuts to be. It's a lot easier to slip if I was holding my paper way back here and trying to cut over here. And yes, it makes it feel safer because the blade's not so close to you, but it's actually less safe because you aren't holding things down as well, and so things can slip and kind of move towards you. You need to apply a decent amount of pressure to cut through Bristol board, especially when you're doing these curves. And notice I'm kind of slowing down my blade and speeding it up depending on how sharp my turns are. I also change directions a lot. So for some cuts, if it has like a really tight turn, like this one, I'll come at it from two sides rather than try to actually turn the paper around, because that can snap my blade more quickly. The sort of tight curves can really break up your blades very fast. So I try to be as gentle with my blades as I can, knowing that I'm still going to be changing them very frequently. Notice that I'm also changing the position of my arm and where I actually come to the cut. I'm not approaching every single shape in the exact same way, depending on where it is on the page. I'm figuring out the most comfortable way to hold my arm in my hand. And when I am closing a shape, I talked about this a little bit when we were doing the geometric shapes. I slow down when I get to my other cut. So when I change directions, I actually slow down and kind of ease up my pressure a little bit So I know I'm not going to accidentally cut too far, because you don't want like weird little X's or extra lines. I kind of ease my pressure and stop as soon as I feel it release, so I don't keep going. Because if you push through, that will actually start to create extra lines. Okay, so now we have the interior cuts, and you can see through the mat kind of how that's going. And I'm going to do the exterior cut, and I'm going to make you watch me do this entire thing. So again, notice that I'm moving the paper as I go. Just sort of change the way my blade is actually coming at the piece. I can feel a lot of resistance already, so I think I'm going to change my blade once I finish this section. Just found an interior piece I didn't get. And if you like you'll see in a second, there'll be a kind of negative shape from the outside of the object I'm cutting out. You can always incorporate those in your work as well. You don't have to decide that this is trash because I traced this one, and so therefore this is the only one I want to use. If you can find a purpose for the other, like if you're doing a collection of these borders, these more organic borders, and layering them all together, you can actually use the negative and positive elements. So, you know, especially if you're mass producing something with this ornate of an edge, you might as well work smarter. So notice I'm not forcing my thing apart. There are a few moments where it's still a little stuck, so I'm using my blade to kind of help to separate things. But now I could probably use this if I wanted. So. And I said I would change my blade, and I didn't. And I regret it. You also might notice that I'm wearing a brace on my hand, and that is because I do quite a lot of this paper cutting, and over time it has made my wrist very sore and given me some issues. So these compression braces kind of help my wrist from becoming incapable of doing this too much longer. It keeps my wrist from getting sore. So it's a little sore now while I'm working, but later on it doesn't. Once I'm finished, it doesn't continue to hurt like it has done in the past. And what I'm cutting out right now is actually one of Haeckel's lichen drawings, and this was actually how I started cutting paper when I was in college. I was in a printmaking class, and I was doing a type of printing called monoprinting, which is instead of like an etching where you can reproduce the same image several times. Monoprint, you can only do it once, hence mono. And I was really attached to making the stencils. Like my prints were kind of terrible, but my stencils were very well constructed. And I liked the way the ink kind of stayed on them and stained them. So I wound up cutting up all my prints like my stencils in these sort of lichen formations. So you never know what, I was a sculpture major in college, struggling through a printmaking class, and then I land on the thing through my struggles and land on the thing that I connected with the most, that I've basically built an entire studio career on. I did not follow that line. So when I'm cutting, I don't want to try to force the blade too hard, especially when I'm doing the curves. So when you go and do these tight curves, you want to keep moving the paper so the blade isn't actually the one turning, the paper is. And if you are turning the blade, that you go very slowly so you're not forcing anything to work beyond what it wants to do. And I like to kind of, as I go along, try to separate things instead of at the very end. I wish I knew how to speed this up like those inside the video. You're certainly not required to do anything this intricate within the assignment, but I wanted to sort of show you an intricate cutout so that you could, if you do something with this much of a complex edge, you kind of know how to approach it. The same with interior cutouts, you don't have to do them, but if you choose to, now this would have been a very delicate object to try to hold on to while I was doing the interior cutouts, which is why I said to do them first. And it's certainly not smart to try to do the cutouts after you start forming the piece, because then you aren't able to utilize the cutting mat. You're kind of cutting into midair. And sometimes that's, the only way you can do it, but the more you plan, the better, so that you're making things easy for yourself so you can have the best crafted piece possible. I can feel my elbow hurting. I often wear a compression sleeve on my elbow as well. actually when I'm doing cutouts like this. And there you have it. So notice how much easier, so this is very difficult. I'm feeling a lot of resistance here to manipulate this part of the paper, yet this part I could actually manipulate very easily because of all the interior cutouts. So if you wanted to shape your piece and not have a lot of scoring, this is another way to do that, to kind of break down the structure of your paper.